Please welcome writer and director Rickles.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, a lot of people survived, I see. Okay. Thank you. You probably want to ask me about the ending, but please don't, or keep it for like the last question. Because even if you torture me, I'm not going to explain it. So, Mossad is Mossad.
So as you know from previous years, the way this works is you ask the questions, Iran will answer the questions. I will repeat the question to make sure everyone can hear it. And also remember, you can tweet your questions at #SBFF. I have my phone here. I'm ready to read your tweets if you would prefer to write your questions. So do we have any questions for Mr. Rickles? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So she said the scenery was excellent. It was like another character. And the question is, will there be a sequel?
I'm too old for that. Somebody else will do it. Yeah, no, I have to say that I have a cousin who actually supported this film. His name was up there, Ira. We were born on the same day, October 2nd, same year. I was in Jerusalem. He was born somewhere around here, I think. And he said to me immediately, we've got to do a television series, Netflix, Amazon. Maybe, I don't know. But I kind of tend to feel that, at least from where I come from, you have to move on. I mean, sequels are very American in a way, but no offense. But I'm moving on, I think, even though I love these two characters, I have to say. And since possibly they're both alive, but that's not a hint. It's not a clue. It's nothing. Yeah, I might revisit these women, maybe under a different kind of character. I mean, I have to say that I should tell you before anybody asks about this, that this was a short story that was written as part of 3 short stories published in a book in the late 80s, supposedly written by a man, a Mossad agent, called Talia Ari. I read the book. I thought this particular story intrigued me and kind of caught my attention. 3 months later, it was actually published, or suddenly the press was full of, this is not a book by a Mossad agent. It was not written by a man. It was actually written by Shulamit Ar-Even, who was a very famous writer in Israel who normally wrote very, very heavy books. I never read them, I have to say. And suddenly she had this wish to write something, a bit of a thriller, a bit of a Mossad story. I think her husband was actually in the Mossad, so I kind of guessed that. But it was mainly about these 2 women, and even though I really changed the story a lot, because as I said, it was a very short story, so they just die, basically. And I really had to kind of move forward with other options, twists and turns, and really explore this relationship further. But there's something at the core. I can tell you one line in the story that I stuck with, which was when the door opens, there's this woman with a red robe. And I felt that was something, it's just a red robe, but it's beyond that. It kind of represents something about her passion, about her past, about her complexity. And that kind of stuck with me. That's probably the first image that stuck with me and kind of kept me going through a very complex story. And apropos, I have to say about the setting. I'll tell you about one moment when I was preparing the film. And this was not in the script yet. We found this house in Hamburg that you saw. And I was standing in front of it, very much like Nomi. And for the first time ever, I've been to Germany probably 50 times. And I looked down. And on the pavement, I saw these 2, metal plaques with names and the year 1942. And I asked my German host, what is that? And he said, come on, it's all over Germany. It commemorates the memory of all the people who were sent to Auschwitz or to other places. And I never saw it, you know, maybe because I'm Israeli, I don't know. It's a new generation, new way of thinking. I never saw it, I never looked down. But when I looked down, I felt that I understand what this film is about, because it's all about betrayal, it's all about trust, and it's all about history and what we carry behind us and what we carry at the present day. And at that very moment, I understood my own film. So apropos that, it was very much a connection to a place, a time, and a curse, as Mona says, this place is cursed. Sorry about the long answer. But, thank you.
More questions? Yes, sir. Have the Kurds and the Israelis always had an affinity?
It's very interesting because, you know, when I grew up as a child, even before '67, before the Six-Day War, there was always this myth, in a way, of the Kurds in the north of Iraq or the east of Syria that were Israeli allies. It was always kind of, you know, you couldn't really comprehend it, but as I think, as he says, you know, the Kurds are the Jews of the Arab world, and I think even if you look at the, you know, everything that's happened in the last few years in the Middle East, and it's still happening, you know, ISIS is possibly gone, but who knows, and everything keeps shifting all the time, and the Kurds were always there, very much the victims of many of the things that happened, but also very much allies of Israel, maybe of the Americans. You never know. It's really about shifting loyalties. So yes, I mean, the simple answer is yes. And also, I have to say that while I was writing the script, which initially was supposed to take place in Paris, I was editing my previous film, Dancing Arabs, or Borrowed Identity, as it was called here, because the American distributor could not cope with the word Arabs in the title, so we changed it. I was living in an apartment in the 10th district of Paris, which is a very kind of ethnic district of Paris. And right next to my building was the Kurdish Cultural Center. And something like a month after I left, 3 women were found in this Kurdish center one morning with, sorry to say this, it's a bit rough, but with a bullet through their head, shot, dead. A mystery never solved. Very complex relationships. The president, President Hollande, the president of France at that time, sort of said, oh yes, I knew one of these women. So there was immediately kind of very deep connections, but it was not solved. So that kind of inspired me also to kind of get the Kurds involved.
More questions? Yes, sir, in the back. So the question is about the person at the newsstand and the person at the balcony. What can you tell us about those 2 characters?
Well, not much. I mean, actually the actors kept asking me, who are we? I don't know. I mean, I kept juggling with that. It's interesting because I really tried to feel the same way that Nomi feels, in the sense that you look out the window, you see day in and day out this man looking at you. Is he actually taking care of you? Is he against you? Is he spying on you? Maybe it's that layer of protection that that Avner, the Israeli Mossad guy, was talking about. Don't worry, we have the place covered. The newspaper man, same thing. I'll tell you a funny story that, I mean, if you notice this Sebastian Neuer, this handsome-looking guy who meets her at the elevator, and then is in her dream as the one who kind of comes in and tries to kill her. He then shows up, apparently a Mossad agent, to protect her a little bit too late when the Hezbollah is in the apartment. I actually did 2 variations on that, and the guy from the newspaper stand was also running up the stairs. He's a bit chubby, but it was okay. Running up the stairs as a Mossad agent. Sadly, I had to inform him that he was not used as a Mossad agent. So, but it was very much, I think, you know, it was a very subtle, and I have to say challenging, because task to really deal with reality, not make it too kind of, you know, I didn't want to make a film about paranoia in an obvious way, but obviously paranoia is part of the story, and also Nomi's very fragile state of mind. So I think anybody she sees, and we have that kind of moment of anxiety on the street where everybody's an enemy, every sound, every face. So I think that's the way I treated these guys. You know, they're really, to the last moment, you don't really know what their function was.
And we do have a question from Twitter asking, was there a significance with the fourth floor?
Nope. Well, I tried to, again, as all films, I think there are things, small details that you discover slowly. Maybe you get them first time, maybe not. Because, the handsome guy, Sebastian, he comes down from the fourth floor. He says, I'm looking for an apartment on the fourth floor. So I just tried to focus on this fourth floor element. And obviously, every ride up to the fourth floor is a journey with this very old elevator. I have to tell you a funny story about the elevator. Since I wrote the script in Paris and was supposed to be in Paris initially, and Paris is full of these kind of elevators, when I shifted the story to Germany for a variety of reasons, mainly financial ones, I have to say, and I set the story in Hamburg, and my people there, my production people said, we don't have these kind of elevators in Hamburg, sorry. So I literally, directors, you immediately sort of say, come on, what are you talking about? I Googled old elevators in Hamburg. And I got this crazy guy who had a fetish for elevators, and he shot them on his iPhone. And I immediately saw this beautiful elevator. And I checked it, turned out it was some kind of hotel in Hamburg. We called them, and of course I said, you see, so easy, just Google it. And we called the hotel, and they said, yes, we do have this elevator, but we're actually going to refurbish the whole place, so the elevator is out next month. So we had to say, no, please, wait 3 months for us. And I have to say that they did. So these are probably the last images of this poor elevator. But it served us well.
Another question from the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Right, so she said she liked the way the two women characters grew to care for each other. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
In real life, in the film, she's Lebanese, yeah.
So, right, so the question is about the actress who played Mona, who in real life the actress is Iranian, and was this dangerous for her to play this kind of role?
Natural charm, what can I say, Well, no, I was actually telling somebody before the screening that we met through a mutual friend, a French producer. Golshifte, basically, she's Iranian, her whole family is still in Iran. And she left because something like, I think 11 years ago, 12 maybe, 10, she made a film with Ridley Scott called Body of Lies, and she played a Jordanian nurse who had an affair with Leonardo DiCaprio, who was playing a CIA agent. And of course, there were some sex scenes, and when she went back to Iran, nobody was happy with that. And I think not for fear of nobody would really put her in jail, I think. But they gave her a hard time, and she sort of said, being a free spirit, I'm out of here. I don't want people telling me what I have to do and what I don't have to do. So she moved to Paris, and she never went back, even when she meets her family in Europe. When I approached her and I gave her the script, I think the most specific thing she said is, we cannot show that we are afraid. We being, artists or people or free people, anybody. You cannot be afraid. You cannot show fear. We have to stand up against tyranny, against people who want to bring us down. And so it was a mutual decision that we'll protect each other, and we have no fear. No, she lives in Paris, and she is quite. I mean, she's something. What can I say? She's really a bit like Mona on the screen, but maybe a little bit more elegant than Mona. And she's a wonderful person.
That's a great question. More questions from the audience. Yes. Well, that actress, what was the real face, the before or the after?
Do you think I remember? No, the before was the face that you saw when she was in Lebanon with the big nose and the long hair and all that. You know, it was a tricky, this is probably one of the trickier parts in the movie because I went to all these expensive plastic surgeons to get advice, and it's complex because I didn't want to turn into some kind of, you know, post-plastic surgery monster. And at the end of the day, you know, I always had, I guess, Betty Davis and Joan Crawford in my mind somehow, if you remember. I had a lot of movies in my mind, I have to say. I mean, in terms of, you know, Rosemary's Baby, for example, where fear comes through the walls, you know, and then from sounds around you. But about her face, at the end of the day, I decided not to deal with it too much and to really just, it was all about layers. I think it's about layers coming off her that expose her soul, not necessarily her face. It's kind of an elegant way of answering that.
Did that answer your question?
Probably not.
Yes, sir. Hang on, I'm sorry. Yes, first.
The actress that played Naomi, did you have her in mind when you had the photo of the character? She had so many close-up shots of her face, and her face was simultaneously expressive and sort of serene.
Yes.
So the question is about the actress who played Naomi. Did you write this specifically for her?
No, in fact, no. I mean, she's quite a famous actress in Israel, but she did mainly television until I met her. And I decided, on one hand, I decided not to see hundreds of actresses because I somehow felt that I know what Nomi is like. And when she showed up, I had to admit, but I couldn't admit it because I'm a tough director, that I immediately knew after 10 minutes that she's going to be the one. But then I saw another 20 actresses, just to be sure. And then I called her back, and I did a second audition, and still I wasn't sure. And then I did a third one, and I said, okay, enough. You got it. That's it. I think at the end of the day, you know, directors look for secrets in their actors, and you don't really want to know everything. And I think once an actor has a secret which drives the director to kind of explore or try to understand what those secrets are, secrets, demons, fears, hopes, everything. And I think both of them had that, you know, and really that's what drew me to A, choose both of them, B, put them together, and then wonder how I'm going to handle this, because on one hand, I can tell you that the first time I had a rehearsal with both of them was in Paris. After 10 minutes, I thought, this is not going to work, because they were so different. And Golshifter, the Iranian actress, was looking at me with eyes of, I'm not staying here, I'm out of here. You know, what am I doing with this woman? But actually, I thought that's great. That's exactly what I needed. I needed that kind of friction between them that then I could slowly bring them together. And I tried, not totally successfully, but I tried to shoot the film chronologically as much as I could. So it really was part of the process of them getting to know each other and get close.
And I believe there's another question over here somewhere. I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah.
So, right, so the question is, how much of the film was shot in Germany? How much was shot elsewhere? Where else was it shot? Why was it shot in Germany?
Well, first of all, as I said, I wrote it for Paris. It's a kind of dramatic story because I wrote it in Paris. It was supposed to be financed by a very big French company. I was actually on a sort of sabbatical in Philadelphia at Penn. I was teaching a semester at Penn University. And I flew to France, to Paris for 3 days to actually sit, on diaries and sort of say, okay, we're going to start shooting in whatever, May. And when I came to the offices in Paris, I saw everybody with a grim face, and they informed me that the big boss, he is kind of a big boss who has an office on the top floor, he doesn't want to make the film. He just wants to make French comedies, and this is not a French comedy. So I was really upset, but finally I walked out. It was like 2 days before Christmas, so it was problematic to actually do anything about it. And after Christmas, after the New Year, I talked to my old German partners, because I have an ongoing relationship with both Germany and France, actually. All my films since The Syrian Bride were co-financed by these countries, simply because I discovered at some point that there are enough financial bodies in these countries that just want to support a good story. They don't care if there's a German story in it or not. But in this case, I could come with a certain strength and sort of say, listen, the whole story is going to take place in Germany. It's part of the story. It's part of the atmosphere. And actually, I fell in love with that because I felt, in a way, it's more original than yet again going to Paris, which is, of course, Paris is very romantic and beautiful, but maybe that's not what I was looking for. So financial reasons led to creative reasons. It was all shot on location. The exteriors, the house, and I mean, it is really Hamburg, but the interior is actually in a small village near Cologne in the south. So it was a mix. I have to say it was one of those challenging films where, Nomi, let's say, walks in the apartment, which is in this Bad Honnef, it's a village. She goes to the stairs, that's already this hotel that I told you about in Hamburg. She goes down the elevator, she comes out, it's already another building because the hotel didn't serve as a building. So it's another building, the building that I talked about with the stones on the pavement. But when the camera actually shows her going towards the trains, that's already another location. So a simple, walk out, go down the elevator and step out to the street was more or less 4 or 5 locations, which required a lot of, focus, but that's what we do, filmmakers, I guess, and it just comes kind of naturally. We did shoot in Israel. Sorry to say, but Lebanon was shot in Israel. I hope there's no Lebanese people here who will be offended about that. But I had to do everything in Israel, obviously, but it's quite easy because the landscapes are quite similar.
So you didn't consider rewriting it as a French comedy then?
Yeah, it could work. The scenes with the wigs and everything, why not?
Any better questions than the one I just asked? Yes, sir. So the question is, did you confirm with any secret organizations that shall remain unnamed?
You're in trouble for asking this kind of question, you know that. Basically, yes. Sorry, but... well, actually, I did speak to some former... They say they're former agents. Who knows? No, actually, I spoke to a couple, and also I have to say it's a funny story that when I was a kid, but no, I'll start from the end. A couple of years ago, I walk into my local grocery just to buy some whatever, and I see a rather old man buying, 2 yogurts and some milk or whatever. And I look at him and I see this is Tzvi Zamir. Tzvi Zamir was probably the most famous head of the Mossad in Israel because he was at the Olympic Games in Munich when the massacre happened, and he couldn't help. He commanded actually the revenge, the famous, if you probably saw Munich by Steven Spielberg, the whole revenge that Israel took on all the Palestinian terrorists, etc. So he commanded that, including, big successes and also big failures. And he was also the famous, I'll be very specific here, he was the famous head of the Mossad who on October 4th, 1973, got a call from an Egyptian double agent called Ashraf Marwan who said, Mr. Zamir, please come to London. And when he did, he said, on October 6th, which is Yom Kippur, on Saturday, 2 days from now, Egypt and Syria will invade Israel. And he called Tel Aviv, or Jerusalem. Golda Meir was the prime minister then, and Moshe Dayan, the famous Moshe Dayan, was the defense minister, and he said, our top agent is telling me that we have a war on our hands in 48 hours, and they said, yeah, he's a double agent, we don't trust him. And the war happens, Marwan said it was going to be at 6 o'clock. It actually started at 2 o'clock. I was there. I was a soldier. I was 19 years old, and this was one of the worst wars we went through. So I see this man buying milk, and I approach him. Now, here I have to go to the backstory. When I grew up as a kid in the 60s, we lived in Beersheba, which is then was a very small town in the south of the country. We lived there because my father was a scientist, and we actually moved from Upper West Side, New York, because my father worked at Columbia and was called by our late president, Shimon Peres, who was then deputy defense minister, and he came here to actually call all the Israeli scientists who were here to come back to Israel to work at the top secret nuclear center that does not exist. You never heard this from me, in the south. And we lived in a neighborhood which had 40 houses. 39 were scientists, like my father. One was the commander of the southern region of the army, and this was Mr. Zamir. So he was my neighbor since I was like 9 years old. And all these years later, I approach him at the grocery and I say, Mr. Zamir, you don't know me, but you knew my father. So he was actually my top source, because obviously it was nice to meet him, and he didn't say much, I have to say. Even when I tortured him, it was nothing. But I backed myself up. On the other hand, I think I let myself have a certain freedom, but also a certain logic, which I guess everybody has. And when you're an Israeli, you grow up on all these stories anyway, and you sort of suspect all your family of being in the Mossad.
So we have time for just one or two more questions. Yes, sir.
I'm just getting started. Thank you for that.
Right, so the question was about the music, the musical process, if there's anything
sound.
interesting about the composer you want to tell us about.
Yeah, well, this
Because
is an
I
open
know-
door because the composer is my son, so that's an easy one. He actually composed already for me. He's a jazz pianist, basically. If he was here, he would say, I'm a jazz pianist. That's what I do. He went to New School in New York. He's really a very talented jazz guy. But 4 years ago, when I did Dancing Arabs, one day, and he came back from New York like a few months before that, and one day I said to my wife, do you think if I propose, Jonathan is his name, if I propose to him to write the music for my new film, will he do it? And she said, try. And I really tried, and you know how it is, father and son, we all know how it is. But he actually said yes. And then I think we had only one major fight, which is not bad. When you think about directors and composers, normally it's like you want to kill each other. So he did well. And then in this film, which was totally different, tone-wise, we talked a lot. I think we had some references which our feeling was it has to be electronic somehow. I don't know why. It was a feeling, it was a sense. Maybe this kind of feeling of detachment a bit. Electronic in a very complex way, and yet involves some real instruments like cellos and violins and real guitars and a real piano, which he played as well. So the music was, we tried not to have too much music, which I don't think there's too much music in this film. And it all blended into the sound design, which is really an interesting question because I've been working with the same sound designer for 15 years now. And I think we walked away from the final mix saying this is our best mix ever. And I really feel that way, even though it's quite silent. And that's what makes all these trains jump out and all these, the external sounds. But we were tempted and then we resisted having too much, sounds infiltrating the apartment because it would be too easy to have, people stepping above you and all that. We felt when the door is closed, the door is closed. When it opens, you have all these people marching in and all these voices in a way marching in. But it was like an embryo in a way for me, this apartment. And then, but you know, embryos hear everything, I guess. So.
Did anyone have a question about the ending of the film, like what happened at the ending of the film?
I'm out of here.
Maybe?
Bye.
I think maybe people have a question about that.
Yeah. Well, I have to say this. Everything is possible. It's really what you want to take away from the movie. You know, it's either all in the mind, which is an option. It's all in the mind of Nomi. It's wishful thinking. This never happened. Mona is dead. The kid, sadly, is dead. But if you don't want to go in that direction, you can also think, and if you want to think that way, you can think that the Mossad is really very clever. And even though everybody lied to both Mona and especially to Nomi, I mean, that, you know, beyond everything, this is a film about women in a man's world, and you know, defined man's world where nobody tells the truth, nobody. And even though Nomi is at the core of it, she's manipulated into emotionally going to Lebanon to kill this man and to also fulfill her friend's wish, which is, you know, get my baby out of there. But then it turns out he's dead, but maybe he's not. So maybe the Mossad did a really clever thing. And, you know, when people ask me about the body in the apartment or about the 4 bodies that German television announces, don't believe television, you know, fake news, that's what you say here, no? So that's another option. And the option that I prefer, which has the Mossad involved, but it's really going back to the Kurds. There's this Kurdish guy who, if you really listen to what he says, sleep it over, in the morning you'll know what to do, and when you do, I will take care of everything. And I think the combination, and you know, she comes to the Kurdish guy because Mona said, if you cannot trust anyone, one morning, one day, there's one man in this world you can trust, and you'll just know it. And I think I really believe in those kind of things, but even though it's a little bit cinematic, I guess, or a little bit poetic, but you know, hey, it's a movie.
Aaron Rickles, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.